Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now here we are then, end of an era. CSGO is no more. For the last, well, since I've had this YouTube channel really, CSGO has played a massive part in it, because although I've never really played the game that much in my spare time and I've never really been very good at it at all, I have featured it heavily over the years because it's been a great one to play on hardware of all capabilities, whether it be low end or high end stuff. Now though, well, we have CS2, and today I thought we'd see how well the game runs on its new minimum system requirements, or specs that are close to that anyway, because things have changed since the original game's release way back in, 2012. But let's get into it. Now interestingly, the minimum specs are still quite tame. The game requires or suggests 4 hardware CPU threads, an i5 750 or higher, 8 gigs of RAM, and a video card with at least 1 GB of VRAM and DX11 capabilities. This is a little bit higher, well, quite a bit higher than the old minimum specs, which were something like a Core 2 Duo E6600, Phenom X3 8750. This is off the top of my head, and 2 gigs of RAM. I must have seen these minimum specs 100 times. We also tested them way back when as well. I think the graphics card requirement was something like a 256 megabyte DX9 GPU. Unfortunately, DX11 is required now, and when I tried to test the game CS2 on an older card, the 9800 GT, which is a DX10 GPU, unfortunately, well, we got this message. So although the specs have increased, it's still pretty easy going in terms of the hardware that it suggests. So just how well does it do on similar hardware to this? Now, I don't actually have an i5 750, but I will be using an i5 2400, which is a 4-core, 4-thread CPU. You are going to run into the same limitations in 2023, and that is that you won't have enough cores for most modern games. I did think the memory requirement was quite high, 8 gigs of RAM, considering the other specs here. And for the video card, going back to that, 1 gig is suggested. I'll be using the GTX 560 Ti 448, which is pretty much the oldest card I own at this point. I'm cheating a little bit because this has 1.28 gigs of VRAM, but it's going to be the CPU, I think, that's the main limitation, so this shouldn't matter too much. This is a DX11 compatible card with the required shader model 5 support. Let's see how well these specs do, shall we? Now interestingly, CS2 has FSR, which I wasn't expecting. I've had no early access to this. I didn't get early access to the game when other people did. I just don't think I had played it enough, to be honest. I was working on it over this past week, and all of a sudden CSGO went offline and CS2 was available, so a bit of a waste of time on my part, unfortunately, but that is always the way. Now, as I expected, the i5 2400, a suggested 4-core, 4-thread CPU, is pretty much maxed out at 100%. Almost all of the time. It's the main limitation here. That being said, performance is okay. We're seeing at least 60 FPS at 1080p with the lowest settings. We aren't using FSR here. FSR is of course now available, but I left this off because, to be honest, it doesn't really help when our CPU is such a limitation. At least I found that it didn't make much of a difference. Now, just like when using older hardware in CSGO, the original version of the game, there are going to be a few dips and drops here and there, but overall our average really wasn't too bad. This was quite a surprising result in all honesty. We are still exceeding 1 gigs of VRAM, so I think, well, I don't know, maybe if this was a 1 gig 560 Ti, things may be affected a little bit, but as I said, it's the CPU that's going to be the main problem here. Though I have to say, I think they're pretty accurate, these minimum specs. I think Valve have done a good job of suggesting what I would call the bare minimum to run this game with at least 60 FPS most of the time. Because even so, there are a few moments of slowdown here and there, which can be a little bit off-putting, and, well, in situations where it's just you and the enemy, one little stutter can mean the difference between being the one who is wiped out and the one doing the wiping out, so to speak. I still haven't improved, as you can probably tell by my CS2 gameplay here, but that's going to take a lot more than a decade, I think. So although 8 gigs is definitely recommended, I think if you're using an older system like this, you might actually have 4 gigs in your PC. That's just an assumption, of course, but I also wanted to see how 4 gigs handled CSGO. So we'll switch to 4 gigs now. This is the stuff I have, two 2GB sticks of 1333 MHz DDR3. We were using 1600 MHz before, so the speed is lower as well, but we're still running in dual channel mode. Now, surprisingly, there was very little difference when it came to the gameplay. The average was slightly lower, the 1% was also slightly lower, but the frame dips and drops reflected in that 0.1% low, well, the figure was basically the same. So no real performance differences here, at least not with the Dust 2 map here and with the specs. I think, again, because the CPU is such a limitation that everything else is a little bit irrelevant, but there we go. CS2 does run on the minimum specs, or specs that are close to minimum, and you can still have a pretty decent time. I stuck with 1080p because dropping the resolution, it's just going to put more load on the CPU, which isn't going to help. But if you do have an older PC, you can still play the game, so that is worth bearing in mind. If you're using an older DX9 or DX10 card, however, it looks as though you can't. Maybe there'll be a workaround or something, I don't know, but as of yet, I couldn't get any DX10 or DX9 cards to work. But in 2023, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you watching, have a card capable of DX11 and higher. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this one helpful, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, of course. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of CS2 and how it performs for you, of course, as well. And hopefully, I'll see all of you in the next one.